Hello, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Sara Stern, and I lead the philanthropy practice at Lipman Hearne, and I am super excited to be here with esteemed colleagues, Laura Aikens and Pete Hoskow from CCS Fundraising, and my colleague, Colleen O'Grady, the Senior Philanthropy Strategist at Lipman Hearne. And we have a delicious meal of ideas, insights, tools that you'll be able to take away today. And we hope you'll continue a conversation with us after today. We're really, we're so thrilled to have CCS here with us on our platform to share their insights and then for us to be able to respond and connect with you. So let me just, a couple of housekeeping things before we get going. We have some elves in the background who will help you address any tech challenges. We had one, in fact, right before we started, which is why we're a couple minutes behind, but we have elves who can help you. So if you have any questions, drop them in the chat about tech. And also, as you're listening today, please write down your questions, put your questions in chat, and we are saving quite a bit of time to have a conversation with you at the end. So we're eager for your questions, eager to have a conversation. And so with that, we're going to get started. So I wanted to just quickly introduce you to Lipman Hearne for those of you who may not know us. As I mentioned, I lead the philanthropy marketing practice here, and Colleen is our senior strategist. And we're a marketing communications agency in Chicago. Most of you know that. And we do brand marketing, communication strategy, and philanthropic marketing. And we only work in the non-for-profit sector. And we're just delighted to share these ideas with you. A few of our recent clients, just a snapshot, are University of Minnesota, WGBH, Environmental Defense Fund, and so on. You can see these logos yourself, but it just gives you, I think, a sense of the kind of work that we do across the nonprofit sector. And happy to be here with you today. I'm going to turn it over to Pete, who's going to introduce you to CCS Fundraising, and then also to some of the insights that they have to share with you today. Pete.
Thank you, Sara. Thank you, Colleen, and welcome to my colleague Laura Aikens, Aikens as well. We're so grateful to share the stage with our friends at Lipman Hearne, and we're certain to together put forward information that is resonant within these very unusual and topsy-turvy times. My name is Peter Hoskow. I am Principal and Managing Director with CCS. Very briefly about CCS, we are a national firm, an international firm, with offices across the United States and in Europe as well. And we have the great privilege of working with exclusively nonprofit organizations across all sectors of the nonprofit world. In any given year, we would work with upwards of 400 client partners spanning the nonprofit sectors. And our work is all things fund development. So from fundraising planning, campaign management, assessments and reviews, annual fundraising enhancement plans, data and analytics, communications, and the rest. We provide interim leadership as well as board engagement, and very grateful to have the opportunity to be with you all today. Likewise, we share with you here just a series of our current or recent partners that would represent, again, the full continuum of the nonprofit world. These are a handful of our clients, though there would be many more alongside these great client partners as well. And into the content, which I think Laura and I together would, and Laura will introduce herself here in just a moment. We just want to ground the conversation with an understanding of some of the current data points that amount to the reality that we are all facing as practitioners, advisors, and thinkers in the space of the nonprofit world today. There's never been a time quite like today. and we thought we would lay some foundational knowledge here in terms of some of the studies and data points that help us understand where we are and perhaps help us plan for where things will unfold from here. There's a number of factors that are affecting fundraising in this calendar year. These are weighty factors, no doubt, from politics, climate change, a global pandemic, the associated impact on the economy, the racial reckoning that we are in the midst of, and just general global unrest that has association with some of these previous points. Dramatic impacts and ripple effects that flow from each and every one of these, let alone when taken together. This is undoubtedly a remarkable and unique year as it relates to philanthropy. We'll go over some data as I suggested, but I think the headline is this. You would be hard pressed to find anyone who could have predicted where we sit today in the early half of December in terms of the generosity that has already been captured in this calendar year and the momentum that is in place as a result of that generosity. I think there was much higher level of doubt in the spring, in the onset of the pandemic, than presently can be observed through the empirical data, and some of that we'll review here. Individuals remain tremendously generous. This slide that we have in front of us here is the outcome of a study that was undertaken in partnership by Fidelity Charitable Trust, along with the Chronicle of Philanthropy. And two data sets are represented. One smaller data set by Fidelity Charitable, which engaged just shy of 500 donors, and then a broader data set, upwards of 1,000 or so, of individuals who have given $100 or more in calendar year 2019. And you see the data speaks for itself, that 92% of respondents have given already to most or all of the organizations that they would typically have supported in 19, they've given to in 2020. Just 7 will give to some of them, and only 7%, and just 1% will give to few or none of them. The point here is that individuals are supporting the organizations they support this year in line with the organizations they have supported last year. I think this is just an encouraging data point as it relates to the volume of dollars that donors intend to give or have already given. You see 77% have already given as much or more this year as they did last year. 44% plan to give the same amount in this month, December 2020, as they did in 2019, and 36% intend to give more. Again, taken together, we all, I think, can be buoyed by bullishness, that there is potential and there is a harnessed generosity amongst individuals, and we know that individuals power philanthropy in this country. Another study that was released by Quarterly Fundraising Report just talks about the number of donors. New donors went up by 12.6% in the first half, January through June of 2020, as compared to 2019. So not only are individuals indicated in the majority of cases their willingness to give the same amount or more in their own giving, but new donors are emerging as compared to last year. So we look onto the next slide. You know, some of these remarkable sort of bursts of mega gifts. You see that towards the pandemic, as of October, $15 billion had been given to specifically related COVID-19 funds or initiatives. And 32% of American households had given to those. Likewise, $10 billion as of October had been given to racial equity this year. Feeding America, which is one of the most well-recognized brands in philanthropy, we're privileged as a firm to call them our client partners. They rose year over year 46% in terms of donations in the first half of this year. And if you just looked at those charities that really drive a large part of philanthropy in America, 116 of them in particular that amount to about 10% of all contributions in this country, they were up 22% in the first half of the year. Again, I know that in our firm, we didn't sit around prognosticating this in March, April, and May. And we sit around thinking about this stuff all of the time. The heartening demonstration of generosity, I think, comes broadly as a surprise. And some folks who are deep into the data, I happen to sit on the Lilly School of Philanthropy board, which provides the scholarship that amounts to the Giving USA report every year. Some are anticipating that this year, all in, will be a bigger year for philanthropy, 2020, than 2019. If you look on the next slide, we thought a lot and often talk a lot about elections. And this was, yet again, an extraordinary presidential election by any measure. No matter where you sit on the political continuum, this was a unique year. But we know that the data suggests to us with great consistency that presidential elections have little effect on overall charitable giving. There was only one year, in fact, one election over the last 9 where giving declined, and that was 2008, which can be aligned much more closely with the recession than any other factor. So presidential elections really don't impact in a negative way philanthropic giving, which stands in contravention to many assumptions. I'll hand it to Laura, where we'll share some CCS proprietary data from some great survey work that we've been so grateful for broad participation in. But I think the net of these data is that those organizations who are able to remain courageous and zero in on their philanthropic value proposition and advance it in the proper channels have already stood to gain, and as things go along, will emerge strongest on the other side of these extraordinary times. Laura, to you.
Thanks, Pete. And just by way of introduction, I am Laura, as you have probably all figured out by now. I am an SVP with the firm, and I split my time between our Chicago and Dallas offices. And I have had the good fortune of crossing paths with Lipman Hearne at a number of our clients, and so I'm really happy to be here today partnering with them. I have only great things to say. We are going to, as Pete mentioned, do a quick dive now into the CCS Philanthropic Climate Survey, which echoes what he has already alluded to. As 2020 has moved forward, the nonprofit community's outlook on fundraising has notably improved. However, much like the economic recovery itself, not all organizations are benefiting equally, with smaller organizations and, interestingly, those at the very top seeing the greatest impact to fundraising. So all about the data. The first 2 installments of CCS's Philanthropic Climate Survey series took place in May and in June 2020, which documented the immediate effects of the crisis. And our 3rd edition was conducted from September 9th to September 16th. And we think that that provides a window into the nonprofit sector that at this point is half a year into the global pandemic. And we've really moved past the initial onset of crises and into adapting to the words I think we all hate to hear at this point, which is the new normal. And if any of you have any bingo cards that you are playing with your colleagues, there's a word for you to cross off on that bingo card. In terms of the demographics that you see up here in front of you, this is a little bit about the nonprofit organizations that participated in our survey. At the very top end of the scale, education represents over 400 responses, and yet our smaller groups still represent over 50 responses. So a good body of evidence here to draw from. The responses were nearly split in half between those organizations that have budgets of 10 million or more versus those that have budgets of 10 million or less. And our friends in the Northeast beat out the rest of the country in terms of participation rates. On the next slide, you see here depicted what we've been sharing up until this point, that the real or perceived negative impacts of the pandemic on fundraising have reduced over time. And that's depicted graphically here. On the left is year to date, and on the right is looking forward through the close of this year. Since the first survey, the proportion of respondents reporting either a modest or a significant decline went down by 10 percentage points, while the proportion who were reporting an increase went up by 14 percentage points. And looking ahead to projections for COVID-19's effect on nonprofit fundraising through the end of calendar year 2020, I would say that the expectations have generally improved over time among our nonprofit colleagues. Projected declines dropped by 15%, and projected increases rose by 5 percentage points as we look at May to September. Now, this still doesn't really paint the rosiest of pictures, but when we look at the breakdown on the next slide, we get a bit more perspective on what's driving this. So here I think we can start to understand what the results are telling us, that organizations that are reliant on special events or reliant on sponsorships are really feeling the biggest pinch. Foundations and major donors and even the annual appeal are standing in the fundraising gap that is being created as we have seen our ability to gather together in groups really erode over time. Quite a sudden loss of special events, and something that is being really felt by organizations for whom that was their signature fundraising moment of the year. When we look at budget sizes, again, just jumping back into breakdown, this time against budget size, with those at the bottom of the scale, and interestingly, those at the top who are seeing the greatest impact. And just to, again, think about some insights behind these numbers, I might note that the organizations with the largest budgets may be disproportionately representative of healthcare. And when we look at the next slide, which talks about the sectors, arts and culture is at the top of it, most affected, with healthcare coming in second. And we know that the delay of elective procedures really did put a strain on profitability for many inside of the healthcare field earlier this year. I think a bright spot that we're seeing here is that human service organizations are seeing a bump, which follows along with what we're seeing from other clients. Pete alluded to the Lilly School, studies we've seen in the Chronicle. That human service organizations are seeing a bump in fundraising, which of course also points to the fact that many of them are experiencing just a tremendous increase in the need for their services. And so it is heartening to see that where there is need, the generosity of Americans is flowing against those needs within that sector. So turning now to some tactics, online fundraising events are on the rise. 44% of the respondents have dipped their toes into those waters. And on the next slide, we see a little bit about virtual gift solicitations, a similar number that have tried that tactic. And you're wondering if virtual gift solicitations work, the answer is that they do. I would have never told you back in March that this is a tactic that we would be saying is something you should give a shot. But if you have not yet tried a virtual solicitation, I would strongly recommend that you do. CCS represents just a really small sliver of the overall philanthropic pie. But as we look at gifts that just our firm has been involved with, there has been nearly $800 million raised in gifts of $1 million or more since mid-March. And those gifts have largely come through virtual solicitation. So even at the very tip top of philanthropy, where we're looking at 8-figure gifts, we have seen virtual solicitations work. So we suggest you give it a try. And on the next slide, we look again at some of these steadfast tactics versus those that might be a little bit new to us and we're trying on for size. As we close out our survey results here, you can see that respondents noted that they are finding success in reaching out to their nearest and dearest, current donors, major donors, and board members. And when we take a look at the methods that participants are using to engage and cultivate those donors, we do see a notable rise in those virtual engagement methods. The proportion of respondents who cited that they have tried a virtual briefing as a primary method of cultivating or engaging their donors has jumped 7 percentage points from June until September. So people are giving it a shot. And again, we recommend to you that you give it a try. The rise for virtual events, tours, and other activities was even more dramatic, with 14% jump from June to September. And then I know that this is a point that Colleen will want to touch on at some point, but written reports are going up in popularity as well, and those might be delivered virtually, or they might be delivered in paper copy. And so that's a unique thing to be diving into, and I know Colleen's going to speak to that. With that trend in mind, I'm going to hand it off to Colleen, who's going to talk a bit more about what this means for your donor communications.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Laura. And thank you, Pete, for joining us today and being part of this webinar. I really have so much appreciation for the discipline and thoughtfulness that you bring to your work. And when we have the chance to work alongside each other, it's always wonderful. So my job today is to talk about some of the tools and approaches from a donor communication standpoint that we're seeing organizations invest in and make more use of as we go toward 2021. When we think about donor communications, we're constantly, as an agency, thinking about how are we reaching audiences where they are, and by that we mean what kind of technology are they using, where are they physically and geographically, where are they in their mindset, and sort of situationally, what experience are they in the middle of. We think about informing donors and prospects, communicating to them clear and useful information, earning their trust continually in that way. And we think about engaging with them. And we think that we know that content is valuable to a donor when they engage with it. That's why, we sort of, there's a bit of an interplay between engagement as an end and engagement as evidence that what you're providing is useful. Throughout all of it, we're using every tool that we can to advance the brand of the organization. And I'll jump right into some of the principles that are at work here. This is an evergreen fundraising principle. We always want to be centering the donor's feelings. I think in this moment, though, we're seeing almost an amplified emphasis on this principle. This here is a screenshot of an ad that I was served one night late at night. I was on my couch scrolling through an article about vaccine distribution, a lot of heavy stuff, and it was such a breath of fresh air to see this idea that we need you. Even if you've already given, please give again. It doesn't need to be overcomplicated. It can be very simple and straightforward. But what this ad does is it anticipates the way a donor might want to feel in that moment, and it reflects that back to them. I feel needed. I feel like I've got something I can do that's productive, and that will create a result in this world where there's so few and far between opportunities to do so. Another thing that we're seeing increase is the use of content-rich communications as a means of showing your value to your audiences. So something like a podcast. This is an example of the Go Getters podcast from Lehigh University. It's part of their campaign communication strategy. And the host of the podcast is the president of the university. So he's able to get his vision and voice for the university across clearly and really put the university's strengths on display in the way that they engage with leaders, decision makers, researchers, in some cases alumni, and bring out the societal good that's coming about because of Lehigh, because of donors and investors taking a chance on Lehigh, or I shouldn't say taking a chance, that's my editorializing, but making that partnership come to life. And a podcast is, in this day and age, a little bit of a refuge from doom scrolling and from a barrage of Twitter conversations that might be disheartening. A podcast can be an alternative to that, something that is telling a hopeful story and letting you sort of immerse yourself in a content area that's of interest. And we expect that to pick up actually as commuting starts to increase again in 2021. And another example of delivering content to people is the use of an e-magazine or an e-newsletter. What we're seeing is that audiences really appreciate when the content is in the top layer. They want to get straight to information and answers that are useful to them, and without having to close a lot of pop-ups and without having to gain access by subscribing. If you're earning their loyalty by providing information that's irresistible and really valuable, then that's going to be a stronger connection than if you get their loyalty by forcing them to subscribe to a newsletter. And then in this case, the Caltech effect is positioning stories of donor impact in a way that's very deliberately framed in connection with the university's brand as a philanthropic partner. They're known for really enabling high risk, high reward work, and there's not very many institutions that will that can be found by donors who really have that appetite for such work. And then another principle that we see really accelerating in importance is mobile optimization and optimization of the digital experience for the situations that your donors are in. And this is something that has been a recommendation for quite a while, but what we've seen happening is e-commerce retailers have really aggressively in this past year started to condition people to expect a much more frictionless interaction. And it used to be that a 60-second window for completing a transaction online was the expectation. Now we're seeing more like 30 seconds. People want to be able to, click 1 or 2 buttons and see these forms auto-populate with stuff that's already stored in their smartphone. And if they have additional required fields, that tolerance for filling out those additional fields is really approaching 0. So these e-commerce sites have kind of conditioned people to make impulse transactions online, which is maybe great for us, but on the other end of the spectrum, you've got to make sure that your own interface is simple, easy to use, that it's optimized for the device that they're using, and for the screen size. This is an example that we love from Operation Homefront. It's as simple as a web form can be. There were some questions about online events. This is something that we have discussions about almost daily. Are online events here to stay? What we've been hearing from clients and seeing happen is that a lot of organizations were surprised by the appetite for participating in online events. Even as our days are filled with Zoom calls, these special online events can feel very different and can really offer important variety in a person's day. And from a fundraiser's perspective, well, okay, there are 3 or 4 things that I want to say about online events, and I'll hope to remember all of them. But one is that the per participant cost of allowing people to participate is a lot lower. So organizations have been opening up access to events that would otherwise be, maybe a 300-person gala can now be experienced by thousands of people and hundreds of people maybe. And that sort of insight and access to something rarefied is something a lot of people are responding to well. And maybe fundraising is happening in the event with matching challenges and in the moment, kind of an accumulation of on the spot gift pledges. Pledges is the word I'm looking for. And I think that also kind of is a new experience for many people. If your organization was prior to 2020 evaluating the value of a expensive gala or an event that might not have been bringing you as much return as you were hoping, this might be a good window to evaluate redirecting those resources toward other means. Maybe some virtual events, some smaller in-person donor events as 2021 starts to unfold, and some other strategies. And then we also think that virtual donor visits are probably here to stay, or in some capacity. The way we look at it, the donor is not dreaming of a perfect donor visit. They're dreaming of making a difference. And you as a fundraiser are going to do everything you can to make sure that the visit is wonderful, whether it's virtual or whatever format. But the main eyes on the prize goal is getting the donor toward that moment of being able to make a difference at the right time, and suggesting to the donor that can wait a year, as much as a year, until you can have an in-person visit, starts to undermine your message of urgency. And we also know that virtual donor visits give you, kind of different opportunities to supply materials in advance, show kind of immersive experiences and presentations during the meeting, and follow up with materials afterward, whether those are digital or video links that you can send. Something about the fact that the person's experiencing the meeting via a screen makes it easier for them to interact with the supplemental materials that you might be sending. And then speaking of those fundamental supplemental materials, we are seeing an increased emphasis on equipping fundraisers to do that personalization, whether they're working from home, in the future they're going to be on the road, and providing a sort of toolkit, a filing cabinet that's well organized and makes it easy for them to find the custom materials that they would want to show and share with a donor is really where we see that field going. This is an example from Northeastern University, and they have some different sections that are available to fundraisers, organized by content type, whether it's PDFs and narrative cases, things that can be printed or shared electronically, a set of videos that are all tagged with keywords and they can be sorted and searched in that way. It's easy for the fundraiser to use and to select and put together a package that's personalized for that donor. And then finally, this is not, nothing new under the sun. Thanking donors and communicating impact is always important. But we are seeing in this moment, there's so much both appetite for seeing that you're making an impact and also the opportunity to really make an instant impact and get that instant gratification. So our recommendation is usually when you're in the moment of creating a solicitation tile or a solicitation communication, in that same moment, create the thank you the thank you tile or the thank you communication and an impact version of that, so that when you succeed in moving a donor to make a gift, you have those assets ready to deploy immediately, and you can thank them, make them know that they're appreciated, and start to share a little bit of the story of what their gift is contributing to. This is an example from the Chicago Community Trust's COVID-19 Response Fund this year. And this particular asset set, I should emphasize, it uses things like signature colors, transparencies that can be laid over existing photos, and signature font and colors to allow non-designer communicators to customize and make use of these tools from home, when they can't just hop over and poke their head into the designer's office and say, can you help me with this thing? It's a little bit more usable for people who want to just get it done on their own. So I've talked through quite a lot of examples and want to leave time for us to have a discussion. Maybe I'll hand this back to Laura for a little bit of a wrap-up commentary, and then we can open it up to questions.
Sorry, just looking for my unmute button there. You know how that goes, right? When it moves corners depending upon which platform it is that you're working on at any given moment. So thanks for your patience there for just a minute. Just in terms of some wrap-up thoughts, I mean, certainly this time period has created immense challenges for all of us, and it has been heartening to watch the nonprofit community respond in ways that I don't know that any of us could have imagined when we were sitting together back in March and trying to figure out what the next set of months would look like. So from a programmatic standpoint, the way that folks have delivered on their mission has just been incredibly inspiring and wonderful to watch. We are heartened that as people have been putting their needs forward, that donors have come forward to respond in kind, and that as this time period has worn on, that we have seen the fundraising effects lessen, and we're heartened by that. In terms of what we have for overall recommendations, I think you've heard clearly from Pete, from Colleen, from myself, that staying the course is important, that some of these time-tested principles of communicating with your donors, sharing your vision, sharing your story, and inviting them to be a part of it in a meaningful way, as Colleen pointed out, a really quick way, an easy way, a way that shows them how they can quickly make an impact, is really driving results at this time. So in terms of these sort of timeless principles we want for everybody to remember, now is the time to communicate. People are interested in what is happening at your organizations. They want to know your story, and they want to know how you're responding in these moments. Now is not the time to press pause. We know from previous iterations or previous times in our collective history that when the kind of the world seems at your door, that those organizations that take a proactive approach and march forward are the ones that ultimately emerge on the other side stronger. And that the old adage, right? A failure to plan is a plan for failure. And so be mindful of what it is you're putting out into the atmosphere at this time, and take time to step back. Colleen, you mentioned the idea of revisiting your goals for special events right now. What is it that you are trying to achieve? And be thoughtful about it. We know that resources for some organizations that are on the call today have become more scarce as opposed to more plentiful. And so being really wise and thoughtful about how we're spending them is an evergreen principle. And then clinging to your mission and your impact. I love what you said, Colleen, about at the same time as you are thinking about what is my ask, what is that support going to create in terms of impact, and making sure that that's at the forefront of your communications, whether that be in person, virtual, print, written, however it is you're delivering that message. Make the message about your mission, because that is indeed what people are going to respond to. I, in fact, wrote down that nobody is sitting there dreaming about the perfect donor virtual experience. They're thinking about how can I make a difference, and I think that that's really wise words. So with that, we've got a few minutes for discussion, and I think Sara, Colleen, you're going to help kick us off. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Laura, Colleen, and Pete. That was really, it was really just terrific and full of nuggets of inspiration and optimism, I think. So we do have a number of questions, and I'll start with this. I have the most recent one, actually, which is really, I think, have we seen any, and it builds on what Laura was just talking about, which is, have we seen any pattern in the type of content that generates trust and can sort of help generate the greatest response? And I just want to start with an answer, and then I'll pass it on to my colleagues here. But I think, this idea of keeping your donor centered, and it's exactly what Colleen and Laura were just talking about. It's not about what we want, we the institution want. It's how we can help a donor make the impact. And that's why we're seeing that's why we're seeing those increases in giving to COVID-19 issues, to Feeding America, which is really astonishing, to racial equity, because people want to make an impact on these really important issues. And so making sure that you're keeping that what the donor cares about front and center. And I think the other thing is, the other part of the question is, are there any types of content that are more useful? And I think that probably the type of content is less important than what you're saying, how you're telling the story. I don't know, Colleen, Pete, or Laura, if you want to pile on to that.
Well, I can kind of add to your comments from the Lipman Hearne point of view, and then we can see what the CCS suggestions and recommendations are. But from thinking about the type of content that we see creating engagement or really proving to be of value to your audiences, I think what I would say is storytelling that makes room for learning and for understanding a topic that's related to your mission from a new angle is always valued. And one thing I think about is when you're reporting on a discovery, for example, or reporting on a way you were able to make a difference, there's what I call the black box effect in reporting sometimes, where a problem is introduced and then there's this black box that says, and then this breakthrough happens, and then the outcomes start to emerge. But what audiences seem to really value is when you can unpack that black box, give them a peek into what it was about the way you approached that problem that both was successful and also characteristic of your organization, and that might not have been replicable by a different organization, whether it's you know, a scientific research organization that knows the way to empower a real freedom to explore and to discover. Unpacking, you know, so if the audience isn't necessarily like interested in the specifics of chemistry, but they might be familiar with the question of like, how do I make change happen in my organization? That's a more universal story that people can connect to. And so unpacking that black box, letting people see how some of the threads kind of intertwine together, and letting them understand, you know, that kind of magic that happens. I think that's something that we see value in. And finally, I won't go on forever, but letting people have a little bit of an immersive experience and going down a wormhole for a moment. It doesn't have to be super deep, but you know, we want them to kind of be able to have the chance to take a break, take a breath from what they've been doing, indulge in a story, some content, and then step away again.
You know, I think we just talked a lot about kind of development communications, donor communications. Here's a question that might be a little bit more in the CCS space, which is what differences in annual fundraising are you seeing for small organizations versus sort of household top? You know, I think this person said household name large organizations. Are there any particular differences that you're seeing right now?
Yeah, I can get us started, Laura, and then maybe I'll hand it to you. You know, I think the greatest differential in terms of the way from our observation, the way the communication is happening effectively from sort of household branded philanthropies to more localized community-based philanthropies is the channels through which the message is being exploited. You know, I think from a resourcing standpoint, though this gap is getting smaller with social media, from a resourcing standpoint, the larger, bigger branded, you know, bigger brand footprint organizations have the capacity to just be in front of their constituents and all constituents in a more timely, current, and consistent basis. And so what that means, our experience is what that means for the smaller local communities is the need to press even further on what we believe to be the most effective frame, which is to convey to donors, prospective donors, constituents that that there are folks who are giving to them who are like them and near to them. And I think there's an edge that's given to the smaller community organizations in becoming more personal in meeting that objective. You know, framing the sort of the story and the philanthropic value proposition that resonates with individuals and proves to them that there are people near to them and like them giving to the organization.
Yeah, Pete, I concur. I mean, I think that our smaller nonprofits definitely have an opportunity to share a story that resonates very clearly with their donor audience in a unique way, whereas the larger organizations might have to really think about how can I have a high tech approach, where our smaller groups might have a high touch approach, and where in the intersection of those two things, where do I find myself, knowing that we probably need both. And Colleen, just to echo on the point that you mentioned earlier, everybody has a unique story to tell. I mean, we spend a whole bunch of time right now on statistics, right? And what are we seeing statistically within the marketplace? But we know that donors respond to stories over statistics. It's our evolution as people to want to respond to oral history and to process things through storytelling. And so both organizations in that aspect have the ability to do storytelling in a really compelling and impactful way. I think that smaller nonprofits are more often closer to those stories and are able to oftentimes more adequately put the donor as the hero of the story, whereas our larger nonprofit organizations maybe have to kind of shift their thinking, because their message is very often look at the number of folks that we're serving, as opposed to look at this one person whose life that we changed. And so I think that thinking about that intersection of stories and statistics, and thinking about the intersection of high tech and high touch, gives us a lot of a lot of structure for how we go about thinking about our communications in this time.
Yeah.
Great. Here's another question, which is about, are there any particular metrics that we're seeing in terms of evaluating virtual events, the success of virtual events? And I wanted to just mention one thing. Colleen and I were talking about this before we hopped on today, that I've been sent a number of invitations to virtual galas to organizations that I don't actually support. And because there's a low bar for entry, I'm going to join. And then I know I'll be excited. I'll probably be, have a glass of wine and make a gift in the middle of the event. That's definitely one metric for event. And I was thinking about the Goodman Theater, which in Chicago, this is not a virtual event, but they've offered a gift to Chicago by they're making the Christmas Carol open and available to everyone. And to participate, I think it's going to be on WBEZ. You can listen. It'll be an audio play this year. And I think, well, how many more subscribers might they get, or donors might they get by giving that gift? So I think there is that opportunity to create affinity and engagement in a level that that maybe wouldn't have happened before because of the cost. And I wonder if there's any other kinds of metrics that you guys are thinking of.
Yeah, I think, Sara, you mentioned both of them, right? So fundraising success and participation. And what we have heard back from, and Colleen, you mentioned this too, the opportunity to kind of rethink what is the purpose of this event, right? It may have been fundraising in the past, but maybe my primary purpose for this event now is familiarization and brand awareness and getting my name in front of a larger group of people. What we've heard from our clients in terms of virtual events and what's driving their definition of success is participation. So how can I get the greatest number of eyeballs on this event? And there's been a lot of structure put behind that in terms of committees reaching out to their friends and kind of using the networks that exist to drive people to that. That there's a sense of momentum. Right, so this is something that they're finding as a successful factor for their event, that we see progression over time and that it is then viewed as a winning cause. So if you're jumping on for 15 minutes to this virtual event, that you see that the fundraising total goes up and that others are joining in, and then therefore that drives your participation at whatever level. And then the other thing that we've heard, and this is maybe not a metric, but something for us all to keep in mind, is that 20 minutes, you lose them and then you're done. And so you better think about those first 20 minutes that you have set aside as really important ones. And I will confess, having attended a virtual wedding over the summer, and I too, after the first 20 minutes, thought to myself, okay, well, this was fun and unique, but I'm ready to move on now. So these are some of the things that folks are reporting back to us as determinants of success that they're putting forward.
Yeah, one thing that we have also been seeing is a nonprofit organization has the ability to offer a virtual event experience that's different from your family Zoom or your Zoom with coworkers, because there may be influencers and people who are engaged with your organization who are quite likely to say yes to participating in a Zoom event because the time commitment is fairly low and you're asking them to stop by and offer thoughts and comments. It creates an intimacy between that maybe influential known person and the audiences of the event. And so that's one way of kind of heightening the specialness of a nonprofit organization's online event. And I think that another thing that we're hearing from audiences is that they appreciate the creativity that's being shown in conversion of the mission elements to this online platform and this online video platform in particular, whether that means arranging a kind of collaborative musical production that's synced up via Zoom, or inviting people to submit user-generated, like in that Met Gala challenge, or not Met Gala, what's the word? The Getty Museum Challenge, where people were choosing a work of art from the collection and then creating their own version of it using household things. Those sort of user submitted submissions, I guess, user generated submissions, it creates an alignment and a sense of togetherness and all going through something together that people are resonating with. And of course, whatever it is we're going through together is changing all the time too.
Right. I think the other thing just to add on to that, Colleen, that I know you were referencing is also the sense of play and informality. I mean, I think there's an opportunity to be a little bit more informal. Things don't have to be so perfect in this world, and the barriers dropped a little bit, and that also, I think, increases engagement in a way. Here's a question that I think is probably for you, Pete and Laura, to start anyway. But what could donor communications advice do you have for nonprofits with international programming when donors are really prioritizing the needs in their own backyard? How do you sort of make the case for international work and fundraising?
Pete, I'm happy to get this one started and then I can toss it to you. So CCS was really privileged last week to have Shankar Vedantan from Hidden Brain speak to us as a keynote speaker, and it was just fascinating. And he actually talked about this topic. How do you make somebody care about somebody whom they can't see or will never meet? And he talked about the human's unique capacity for altruism and compassion for a person whom they will never touch or meet. It was fascinating stuff. I'm not anywhere near as compelling as Shankar is, and so I won't try to be. But what he talked about, and I think is really best practice and is a challenge to us in this time, is to bring that story to that person's doorstep, right? So we talked about kind of stories versus statistics, people versus programs, and his research really echoed that the difference maker is our own ability to create in our donors' minds the image of that person that they will be impacting, and to help them step out of their own shoes and step into the shoes of that person, look around them and imagine the world around them in a completely different way. And so can I say what that could or should look like? No, but is the advice sound? It is. It's for us to be creative in bringing forth those individuals' needs with the same sense of urgency and the same sense of familiarity and kinship as we create with those who are inside of our own city. That just kind of brainstorming here off the top of my head, we've talked about virtual tours. Now is an absolutely great time to have, if you are an international organization, a Zoom call with somebody across the world. Have them, I think about an organization that I support that combats slavery in Southeast Asia, and what better time than to hand the flip phone or the camera phone over to one of those individuals and have them walk the streets of their town with one of your donors. I mean, there's really the world is the opportunity here at this particular point, and we've never had people more comfortable with this type of virtual and video communication. Let's leverage that to tell better stories and get people connected in a new and different way.
Pete, you probably don't have anything to say to add to that, because that was such a perfect response.
I wouldn't dare try to add to that. Thank you for your insightfulness, Sara.
Well, I think that's actually a really great ending for our conversation today. Laura, thank you for those really terrific closing remarks, because I think as storytellers from the different places we start, we do always kind of converge on that importance of telling stories to move people to action and to help donors and our our clients make a difference in the world. I hope that this was helpful to all of you who are here today. We have lots of tools and ideas, and we Lipman Hearne, and if I can say we CCS would love to continue the conversation and work with you. Please reach out. Our emails are here, and we will send you a note with a link to this webinar, so you'll be able to share it with others in your organization as well who might not have been able to come. But thank you so much for being here, and we look forward to a better 2021, an optimistic 2021. Thanks again.
Thank you all.
Thanks all.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.